All right, welcome back to Way of the Wrench, and on today's very special episode, we are going to be installing our Playfield monitor, including the Playfield monitor mounting kit that comes from pinballcabinet.com, and there might be a couple other things we have to do to make sure that this monitor is going to fit okay. So, you're not going to want to miss it. Stick around. Before we get too carried away installing the monitor, there are some other things we have to install so that we know where to position the monitor and whether it's going to work in that position. So we have to put on the rear plastic glass holder. That way we can figure out where and how much leftover space we have for our matrix. And then we should also probably install the magnasave and flipper buttons along with the MX lighting boards for those buttons from Arnoz, so that we can figure out if we're going to have space and where that monitor needs to sit. So let's start installing that. Okay, once again, I'm using this 1/8 inch thick poster board that I'm going to trim down to the width of the glass, and you only need it a couple inches wide, and that way you can kind of fit this poster board into the rear glass holder and then position this where it needs to be, and then lay out where the screw holes are, pilot drill them, put the screws in. And then just slide the poster board into where the glass would be, slide it up. And then you can take your glass holder and put it on, and then move this up into position. And then make sure you center that glass holder, and then mark those holes from underneath, and then remove this and center punch and pre-drill your holes with the screws. Time to install our flipper and magnasave buttons. Now, when you go to put these in, make sure that you are putting all of the connectors and the leaf switches and anything bulky that sits out from the side of the cabinet. Try to face it down and give yourself enough space that the connectors can go fit in and nothing else is going to get in the way. So let's put these in now. First up is the MX button board. Put that in and make sure the LEDs are sitting in the hole. Then you can install the 3D printed leaf switch holder, and then install the nut on the transparent button. Now, like I said, position these so that they're not going to interfere with the buttons next to it, and yet you don't have everything hanging out near the top. We want it kind of all the stuff down low and give it a snug. Now, if you just go by hand, it's almost enough. However, I do have, every now and then, some of them come loose. So we are going to tighten this up. And I've got this massive wrench here because the nut is actually a 15/16. You are not wanting to go that tight. You are just using this to just get a little bit more than finger tight, and then that is it. That's it. Okay, then you got your leaf switch to go in. The longer leaf switch has to go to the bottom so that the center of the transparent button can hit it. And we are going to be using two number 6 wood screws that are 5/8 of an inch long. And then we're going to thread those in to our 3D printed part. Make sure they're pan head wood screws too, otherwise you're going to be splitting the leaf switch. Once again, don't go crazy tight. It's just plastic and wood parts here. Perfect, there we go. So go ahead and attach the other 3 now. here we go. LG OLED 42-inch C3. Let's open this bad boy up and see what the other width dimensions are and figure out how it's going to fit into our cabinet. Now, I know this 42-inch LG C3 is going to go into this cabinet, no problem. However, some of you are not going to pick this one and maybe you're doing something else. So we're going to really quickly run through the dimensions so that you can really make sure that this is going to fit and not have an issue for you. So, very first thing, really easy, width of the cabinet. This is 21 inches. Let's go check on the cab. Then the width of this cab is 23¼ inches. So minus 21, that gives us 1 1/8 inch clearance on both sides in order to pass by any of our flipper and magnasave buttons. And so 1 1/8 totally clears everything we just installed for flipper buttons and magnasave buttons, so we're good that way. Okay, and the absolute thickest this monitor is, or the depth, is 1.5 inches. Now, if we were to put the Playfield monitor right up to the underside of the glass, and we've got 1.5 inch depth, you can see that we are not going to hit anything like that, including these flipper buttons, because we're going to be 1 1/8 out and already clearing that. Now, if we want to go lower than that with the depth of the monitor at the front where the lockdown bar is, if we measure basically the smallest distance, which is right here, that's giving me 2.5 roughly. So I have room to go down up to 1 inch and then no further before I start hitting on here. Now, the other thing we need to look at too is because only this side has the plunger or something that's going to hit, we can see if the top of the monitor is got any kind of beveling or any kind of like reduced thickness that will allow us to go even further. And like I said, there actually is a very thin spot here and then even an angled bevel. So on top of the 1 1/8 from the side of the cab, we have an additional 1 5/8. So we can take a look and we might even actually clear that plunger, or if we needed to go another inch or so, that might actually work out okay too. So including the 1 1/8 that's already there at the edge of the monitor, plus the 1 5/8 up to the bevel on the monitor, we are now shooting at 2 3/4 inches, which is just clearing the edge of this plunger housing. So we could literally go down to the bottom of the TV this depth here. So that's even a little bit deeper if you needed. So that could give you the opportunity to lower it 1.5 inches lower. All right, so for the range of depth at the front of the lockdown bar, it looks like you can have it flush right up to the bottom of the glass or go down up to 1.5 inches lower. Now for me, I'm gonna go down 1 inch just so I have that little bit more extra feeling of depth at the front, and then I'll have to figure out the back in a second here. Okay, and then with this Playfield mount in here, you can see that there is lots of room to clear the plunger and our flipper buttons and magnasave buttons, and on the other side as well. So that board is not going to be an issue. You can see that there is quite a bit of a gap here. So that means we aren't going to be able to put a board along here for it to rest on along the edges of the cabinet. So we're going to have to put one rail at least to go across as a stopper somewhere here. But that shouldn't be a problem. Sweet, moving on. All right, so with this Playfield mounting board on top, we can now make a measurement from the front of the TV all the way up to the other side of this board, which is 1.5 inches plus 1/2 inch. That is 2 inches. So now we have a number that we can use to start laying out where we're going to put our wooden rail across to support the front of the TV. Now for where this mounting board should be mounted from front to back in the cabinet, this board right now is mounted where it would be for the VESA mount holes for the TV, and the edge of the board is pretty much flush with the TV, so that gives us a hint that this is going to be basically right in front of the lockdown bar for position. And so then we know that we want the bar here where there's this little stick out here, probably right in the center is where we're going to run a bar this way. So if the edge of the TV is here, we can basically put this right against the lockdown bar just for figuring out where the position is. And remember that this can be moved in or out where we put the pivot point later. So for a start, we can put it right there. And then that gives us an idea of where we're going to put our side rail. So we could use the edges of this to make kind of like a temporary mark. And then right in the center is probably where we'll make a measurement from both sides to keep it even. Now for this front support rail, you're basically going to center it between those marks, and then we have to figure out how deep we want it. So from the bottom lip of where the glass is going to be, we want it inset 1 inch, and then we have to include the thickness of the monitor plus the mounting bracket. So that is a total of 3 inches down. So somewhere about like that is where that's going to be. So I would recommend make a mark with a pencil, Do the same on the other side, make sure it's completely symmetrical. And then you probably want to figure out if you want to have the back of the monitor angled down or flush with the glass. And then you could take a strip of tape and basically lay it out and to see what this thing's going to look like and double check if anything's going to hit. Now for this front support rail for the monitor, if we're smart about it, we can incorporate this into the mount for our solenoids as well. Now depending on what solenoids you have, the 3-inch wide, 3/4 inch thick rails from pinballcabinet.com, their extra bonus boards kit will probably work in most cases, so you can mount your automotive style solenoids here. Now because I've got the open frame solenoids, the new ones from Cleveland Software, I'm going to do something a little different. Let me show you. All right, now because I'm using this open frame solenoid from Cleveland Software Designs and the extender boards, the kit comes complete like this. It's literally already mounted on a board. It even has 2 screws ready to go, so you could literally just mount this to the inside of your cab, wire it up, and you're good to go. So that's kind of cool that way for those of you that don't want to mess around too much. However, one thing that I'm not sure or not 100% about is the fact that the flipper solenoid and the slingshot solenoid are so close to each other, I don't even know if you're going to actually feel or hear any difference at all. So what I'm kind of thinking is I'm going to do the extra little bit and separate these a bit and mount them on separate support boards and space them out a bit better, maybe one on the front, one on the back, just to get that little bit of difference between the two. Now one other thing I'm also going to do here is that if this solenoid is hitting like this for a flipper or a solenoid, technically that's moving the cabinet like this and could trigger false nudges, and I'll have to play with my settings for the accelerometer to not detect that. So what I'm kind of thinking is instead of mounting it traditionally sideways like most people do, I'm going to actually mount it so that the solenoid hits in a straight up and down fashion, hoping that that isn't detected as much because it's not a left or right or a front and back motion. So I'm going to make up that support board so it's 5 inches wide, the width of the cab minus 1/8 of an inch, and then we'll mount them like that. So let's go cut those boards. Okay, so just to clarify, I'm going to get 3 boards that are 23 1/8 inch long by 5 inches wide so that the solenoids can be mounted straight up and down. And I'm going to do one for the front, right there for the front support for the monitor, as well as the flipper and slingshot solenoids for both sides. So that's 4. Then I'm going to put another one in the middle of the cab, and that's going to be for 3 solenoids for your middle, left, center, right. And then there's going to be one for the rear sounds, left, center, right, for a total of 10 solenoids. Okay, so with a 5-inch board, it gives us enough room to put this striking plate. And that striking plate's going to sit like that. And so there's enough room for this to go up and down vertically on it and yet mount the striker plate down. Sweet. All right, so since there is an 1/8 of an inch clearance between the board and the inside of the cabinet, I found something that's 1/16 of an inch, the ruler. I'm going to put it against the one side and then match up the bracket and mark where I want it with a pencil. So just right in the middle, hold it in place, transfer your hole locations, and then we can center punch and pilot drill for the screws for these brackets, and do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and then just line the edge of this with the line that you did from the top, and I made some marks so that this would be the same from both sides, and then just mark your screw locations and do the other side. So now that we've got this front support screwed in, we can take our board, and you can see that this is where it's going to sit for the front. But now we got to figure out where the back is and our angle for our monitor. So I think the next step is to mount the dowel rod and the brackets underneath here and figure out our pivot point. And then we can get a temporary jack underneath here to elevate this and get it to whatever angle we want. And then once that's all kind of set up, it might be a good idea to get the monitor put in here so we can nail down our final angle of our Playfield monitor. All right, so for where this dowel rod's gonna go, kind of depends more on the brackets and how close to the edge you want these screw holes. Now I wouldn't go too close. In fact, I'd stay away probably at least 1/2 inch. But ideally, the further back you get, the less intrusion of the monitor you're gonna have into the bottom parts of your cabinet. So we're gonna go 1/2 inch. I can make some lines here on the back. Then we can line that up for the center of the bracket and just transfer that over. And then pilot drill and screw this in. And then maybe for the end, don't have to go right to the edge, maybe 1 inch in. That probably seems more realistic. Now, if you need to change the position of this, you just have to loosen these and you can move the dowel over. Now we need something to support the rear of the Playfield bracket and yet have it adjustable so we can go up and down and get our monitor looking exactly how we want it. So we've got a big space to fill here, so we're gonna use some things you'll find around the house. Textbooks, hey, knowledge is power. So I've got a bunch of these. I'm just gonna space it up off the bottom of the cabinet, and then when I get near the top, I'm going to use one of these. This is a temporary scissor jack. You can find them in the trunk of any vehicle on the planet. So go and borrow somebody else's. And then you can just twist the end to lower or raise the height. And we'll get this set up exactly how we want. So let's go ahead and do that. Perfect. That's going to work great. So if we screw the machine screws in that came with the kit, they go almost all the way down. There's like 2 millimeters that won't be able to go through. So lots of depth of thread, and we literally could just do this. However, to make sure that it doesn't kind of fall into the slot, there is a washer and a lock washer that we can throw in there, and then with that over top of the slot, that should be plenty of able to tighten up in there, no problem, like that. In the kit though, he has also supplied some spacers in here, so if you need to use those for whatever reason, you can. Okay, so go ahead and put the screws in. All right, now because these do have slots in here, I would just try to get this roughly kind of with the dowel hanging out evenly off of the boards, and then give it a screw down, and if you need to adjust it later, you just have to loosen this and move the monitor over. Now take your time, get this thing centered from left to right, get the edge of the display exactly where you want it in relation to the edge of the front of the lockdown bar, and then adjust that angle at the back until you get whatever angle you are shooting for. Now, I do like the idea of having it lower down and looking more realistic for a pinball cabinet, plus it gives you some room for a matrix. However, the new VPX 10.8 has a point of view display in there that makes it look like you have the sides already built into the table. So if you've got a real side plus the side simulated in the display, it kind of looks a little goofy. So I think with this build, I'm actually going to go flush with the glass, but 1 inch down. And I'm going to get that all set up and take a look at what it looks like. And then we got to check and see if there's room for a matrix if we do that way. Once you got this all figured out where you need it, you're going to take these dowel holders and we're going to put them on the end of the dowel rods and then just carefully transfer where those screw holes need to be. Then we can take this out, center punch, and pilot drill and install these, and then do a final test, make sure it's okay. And then do the other side. All right, very cool. Now on these little dowel holders, there is a screw you can tighten up to make sure that this doesn't come out, especially if you were to move the cabinet. So you can do that right now. We're gonna have to figure out a stay for this to hold this up when we're not working. And this does go nice and far forward, but it goes so far forward it's gonna hit our plexiglass. So we're gonna have to put some kind of stopper in here or work that into our stay that we're gonna make. All right, that's looking pretty good. So some future kind of design things that I'm gonna have to think about is what do I do with these 1-inch gaps on the sides, which I knew were already gonna be there. So there's gonna be some kind of lighting strips. And I have a couple ideas of some things we can do for that. And then up at the top, we are gonna fill up this hole with a OLED HD matrix in here from the left to the right. And to give you an idea, this is the tinted plexiglass that comes with the pinballcabinet.com kit for this matrix holder. And so we can kind of get an idea of, what it possibly could look like. So we just have to figure out a way of getting it in here and mounting it, which we'll do in a later video. But you can see that would kind of give you the rough idea. So not completely kind of downwards like if this Playfield monitor was down. So with it being up closer to the glass, it's just a bit of an angle. And I'll give you a view of what it looks like from the cabinet from kind of a first-person point of view. From that first-person point of view, you can see that you're going to have a good view of that HD panel and all the different kind of effects that are going to go on these HD panels. And it's not going to be right in your face with those bright lights. It'll actually just kind of kick it up away at an angle here. So that would work, and it definitely fills up that space. So sweet. We will do that in a later video when we're doing the actual LED matrix stuff. Next up is making a prop rod to hold up our Playfield monitor. Now, there's a whole bunch of ways of doing this. Could do what we did last time on the budget build. Put a block here with a little swiveled kind of hinged prop rod. The only thing that's a problem with this one is the bracket is skinnier than the width, so I would have to have a pretty massive block to be able to get it out to where we could stick it to. So I'm not going to do that this time. We could have maybe something on a hinge, literally that it hinges up here and kind of goes to one of our boards. And we could also not make this as complicated as we need to. We could get kind of those dowel rod holders, 2 of those, put one here on one of our solenoid boards and one on here, and maybe the prop rod just with a couple of Velcros or magnets stuck under here when you're not using it. And when you take it off, you could go like this and stick it into the holder, stick it into the other one, and then that kind of holds it up. If I put my other solenoid boards in here first, then I'll have some other kind of venues or areas where I can put that prop rod. So why don't we go ahead and put those in first, and then we'll figure out this. So we can't put this prop rod with the hinge all the way to the end, because in this section here, it actually has to sit straight on here for the actual monitor height. So what I've done is I've closed this from underneath, took a pencil and marked where I can't go past with this prop rod. And so then we can have it something like this. And when I go to put it down, we're gonna have to put it, because I don't want it extending too far back, we're gonna have to go to the middle solenoid rack. So we'll end up cutting this down once we have the middle rack in. Now, for placement for this middle rack, I have the same problem as the first one here. If I put it the same height, which was 3 inches down, this thickness here is gonna lift the monitor up, and we don't want that. So what I've done, since I'm going to need to have the rod extending past this dowel, is I've measured this, and that is 1.75 inches, just under. So if I add 1.75 inches to whatever this depth is, that'll put it down low enough for this prop rod to clear it. So let's go ahead and put in the middle and the back solenoid rack, and then we can figure out this prop rod. All right, so the overall length of this Playfield monitor is 36 inches, and I've marked the end of where the monitor sits. half of that would be 18. So we're going to make a little mark there and just label it M for middle. And that distance from the front now is where I can place both sides. So I've got the solenoid racks in place, and now it's time to figure out how long I can make this prop rod. So I am going to go to the middle one here, and I can't go past this line, which is the front rack. So if I tilt this kind of just where it wants to start going back down, looks like I need something about 25 inches. And then the other thing that I ran into is, in order for that to be 25 inches, that will come up off of here, so I had to lower these racks, and 25 made it so that the end of this rod was going to be in the way of this rack. So I ended up putting this rack down even further, so it's 7 inches from the top, just so that way when the playfield closes, it's not going to hit here. So I'm going to cut this down to 25 inches and then we'll mount this. All right, when you're ready to use it, just rip it off the Velcro, or I might put a little magnet in there just to keep that steady. Take it off, put it into the dowel holder. There you go, nice and steady, and you can see everything to work on. And when you're done, stick it back on the Velcro or magnet, and then this should close fully up. Perfect. Done deal. Moving on. There you go. The Playfield monitor is mounted almost up at the top, so we can take advantage of the VPX 10.8 point of views. We've got a nice prop stay to hold up our Playfield monitor so we can work in here, and we've even got our 1, 2, 3 solenoid racks ready to go for that video. Now, I'm not a fan of the unfinished wood with the finished cab, so off camera I'm going to take everything out, sand it, prime it, and paint it, and put it back in for you guys. Now, next video up, I think I've waited long enough. It is now time to purchase some computer parts that are hefty enough to do a 4K 120 hertz here. So stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us on Instagram so you can see what's going on in the shop in between videos. Till next time, take it easy.